Hello, over the Christmas and New Year period I've gone back to doing some Gauge 1. These were two or three locos that I'd half started lying around for ages from my Gauge 1 days. And as I've been writing a thread on Trainboard and on Model Rail Forum about things I used to do in Gauge 1 back in the 90s and noughties, it seemed sense to try and get around and finish these things. So the Austerity Tank and the Jet Tie Railway C56 have made a fair bit of progress over the last few weeks. But it's time to get back to doing some Z gauge, and in this case we're going to look at two new designs of body shells to fit on the Rokuhan Shorty chassis. One of which is quintessentially American and one of which is surprisingly British, but they're both Boxcab diesel locomotives. Both of these designs are by Stoney Smith on Shapeways, and this is pretty close to a sort of central New Jersey Boxcab, the sort of GE-Ingersol Rand things that came out in the very early days. Nicely detailed. We'll know better when we put the first coat of reveal primer on, but the first thing will be to get it in the ultrasonic cleaning bath and give it a good clean. The other surprise contender is this, which is a British Thompson Houston Boxcab diesel electric, which used to work at the Ford plant at Dagenham. I knew very little about this. I'd seen one picture, I think, in one of the magazines, and was amazed to find out that it actually still existed and has been preserved on the Kent and East Sussex. I was even more surprised to find I could find the drawings for it. So Stoney Smith's done this one up in Z. Similar but different to the American one, and this is also ready for going in the ultrasonic cleaner. So starting point as always, ultrasonic cleaner. This was a cheapie from a local chain of budget supermarkets. Warm soapy water, and we'll put in the two box cabs, 3 Fairbanks Morsers and another class 37 because I'm quite partial to these. And we'll start off probably about a minute. Bit of manual agitation just to make sure nothing's sticking together, and give them another zap. While that's buzzing away, we can have another look at the Rokuhan Shorty chassis. Now we've got a problem with both of these in that this is remarkably short, so we're going to have a gap at either end. In both cases I'm going to use steps, handrails to hide the gap in effect at either end. The curious thing about the British one is that it had Buckeye couplings with screw couplings laid on top and buffers. So Stoney Smith's done it with the buffers on, but I'll still be able to use KDs, and it had to be quite prototypical. The British Boxcab's looking rather nice and doesn't look as if it's going to need very much cleaning up at all. I've sprayed both the inside and outside. It's most important on these that you get a good coat of paint on the inside, because they can look a little bit transparent when they're stood in strong sunlight. You want to block any light shining through from one side to the other. With the American Boxcab, obviously we've got solid windows, so this is going to need some careful painting to highlight these. Basically on something that's going to be black, we're going to need to do them in a contrasting colour. Trying the two bodies on the Shorty chassis, it became apparent there was quite a bit of a gap above the mechanism inside the British Boxcab. So I've just cut a scrap piece of nickel silver as an additional weight to put on top. This has brought the buffer heights up to the sort of standard height I work to, which is the sort of Marklin one. And you can see the side of this SCA hooded coil wagon that it looks quite good now. On most of the body shells I've had from Shapeways in Z gauge, somewhere or other you're going to find some layer lines, some rasterisation lines. Most of the time you tend to find them on the vertical faces of the ends. On the British Boxcab it tends to be just down one side that needs cleaning up. On the American Boxcab it's principally confined to the ends where there's some distinct vertical lines. I'm going to clean these off by mainly adzing it with an extremely sharp new craft knife blade and then finishing off with some 400 wet and dry glued to a stick. Then I'll do a second coat of primer, just make sure I've got the worst of it off, and then we'll get ready for a final coat. I've actually run out of the caboose end platforms, the marking ones that I tend to use a lot for end steps and handrails and that on the ends of platforms. So what I'm going to use for the British Boxcab is this lovely sheet of etched railings that came with a trumpeter battleship kit, of which they gave you miles and miles and miles of it, so I've got plenty left. The actual steps themselves are from a etched sheet of step ladders and ladders. I can't remember the source of this, but it's quite useful. I suspect these steps and handrails might prove to be a little bit vulnerable in traffic, so while I'm at it I'm going to make some spare ones up and keep them in the stock box just in case I lose any at a show. Turning back to the American Boxcab, which is basically about as interesting as a shoebox, having done a bit more research, which I probably should have done at the start, I found out that first of all they were painted quite a nice shade of olive green, and secondly there's quite a few handrails and things to break up the blockness of it all. So the next thing is to get some number 80 drill holes drilled in this and fit some handrails and grab rails. So here we see the New Jersey one with the addition of headlamps, grab rails, end steps and sunshades. So I've finished the Ford Dagenham shunter off in a mid-green. I'm not going to do the full Ford livery because it won't really fit in with the Republic Steelworks layout that it's going to run on. So this is basically Tamiya mid-green, buffer beams picked out in red. I'm not going to go too mad. I'm going to paint the exhaust a different colour and then potentially look at flush glazing the side windows and the cab windows. Listening to other members on train board, it appears that the New Jersey Boxcabs were originally painted Pullman green in the early days. I'd still got some Acuflex Pullman green, so I've sprayed it with that. It's slightly dark. The issue now is that because it doesn't have open windows, we're going to have to delineate the windows to make them come alive. The key thing with windows that are actually moulded in is you need a clear delineation line between the window and the rest of the body. I'm going to use this is a Staedtler permanent marker pen, but with a very, very fine tip, which actually allows you to draw around the outside of the window. You can then infill the middle bit with black acrylic and it should bring the window to life. These windows are so small that you can actually do the entire window with a marker, and the green frames will stand out from the black. So here we see the two completed locos on Republic steel. The British one still needs a glazing put in and I'll get that done over the next couple of days. The New Jersey one's pretty much good to go. In conclusion, there's a lot more detail on the British one. I think the American one could probably do with a few more bits added. Both would benefit, I think, from the design being modified to include the end steps and pilots. But as a simple quick modification to put on your Shorty chassis, both excellent little models.